Going fine. So welcome everyone to this event here on AI in the EU. I'm Joachim Henkel, Professor of Technology and Innovation Management here at that school and one of the organizers of this European Union Week. To start, a great big welcome to the distinguished panel here. We have three experts on AI, and I'm really myself super curious for what we're going to learn today. We have Dr. Frauke Goll. Frauke, you're Managing Director at AppliedAI Institute for Europe. And it's a very interesting institution in Heilbronn, linked with AppliedAI here. Welcome.
Thank you.
We have Antoine, Leboyer. You've been doing various things. You've been CEO and Director of, what's the name again? GSX. Software company, 2008 till 21, if I remember correctly. So you have a lot of experience in the software industry, and you are Managing Director of the TUM Venture Lab Software AI. Stephan Günnemann, colleague, Professor of IT and Data Analytics and Machine Learning at TUM, and also Managing Director of the TUM Data Science Institute. And that's most exciting part. Currently, you're on leave, actually. And you're on leave because you're one of the co-founders of Pruna. And if you know AI, and I suppose you might, because you're here, large language models have the advantage of being large, a disadvantage, sorry. And Pruna AI is, well, a simplified way addressing that. I'm really curious about that discussion. Briefly, before we get there, a few words about why we're doing this. So 2016, the UK, with a small majority, voted for Brexit. I found this very sad and frustrating. It was driven by a lot of populism and by the following fact that the young people who were very clearly for Remain, so in the youngest age group, 27% only for Brexit, they didn't vote, or, well, few of them voted. The participation was much lower in the young age group than in the older. So it's about the old people decided about the future of the young people, which is not how it should be. If you do the math, had it been equal, there would have been Remain. And so it's important for, well, like you, young people, to care about that. Obviously, I was hoping for a larger audience, but anyway, the EU does a lot of things that one doesn't know about because, well, they run smoothly. We take them for granted. And only, well, after you left the EU, you realize, oops, suddenly, I just talked to a colleague from Master-Plattner Institute, Potsdam, which is nicely funded, and she has trouble hiring a British postdoc. Because they're not in the EU. It's going to work out in the end, but it's just much more trouble than if this person was still in the EU. So many things are getting more difficult. There's a lot of stuff the EU is doing we don't know about. And a part of this event series here is about that, about realizing how many things are happening in Brussels or triggered in Brussels. Okay, so we have this European Union Week happening here since 2017. The string of events is right now, it's 10 leading universities in 10 different countries, including HEC Paris. There's also Kosminski in Poland. There are many other. It's quite an interesting group. Check out the online program if you haven't done so. And, well, the highlight tomorrow morning, if you can make it, in the Audimax 11:30, Magnus Bruna, one of the commissioners of the Commission, the European Commission. Very hard to get these people, so we were fighting quite a while. That should be super interesting. If you haven't decided yet, that's an option. Good. There's also this quiz running. Who of you is taking part in that quiz? Can I ask? Really? Did you not know about it, or are you not interested? You can win a trip to Brussels. Oh, seriously, to the EU Parliament. We have an invitation to 2 people by a European member of the European Parliament. Anyway, we need to do more money next year. Anyway,
They don't have time to go to Instagram, they are studying.
Yeah, but that's part of the studies, you know. But seriously, I mean, to learn about the stuff that's happening at the EP in Brussels, I think it's important. And if you look at the stuff that's happening in the US right now about civil rights, etc., and rights in general, I think we have many good things in the EU that we don't even estimate, I think. So much general stuff. Coming back to our esteemed panel, thank you again for being here. I suggest we start with a brief statement from each of you. Then we come to some questions I might throw it around here, or you could bring up stuff that you can or respond to each other. And then we also have time for questions from you guys. Okay, may I ask you to start?
Perfect. Thank you, Joachim, and thanks for having me. Because I think what you established here is really extremely important. Why is it so important in my sense? Because I think really that Europe totally matters, and that together and only together we can shape the European way, especially when we look at AI right now and all the things that are going around AI and the technology. So together we can drive innovation and successfully manage also this whole transformation process that it is. So shortly from my side, I'm the managing director of the AppliedAI Institute, as you said, but maybe you're wondering what is the AI Institute doing? So for us, it's all about empowering professionals in developing and applying trustworthy AI. So this is what we are about, and therefore I really think that this is an absolutely great session also to bring you guys and the young people to the topic. So this is really, really important. So let me give you some thoughts about this European way and the things that are going around with AI at the moment. And as it is a European habit, I would say, and especially a German one, we always love to look to the right and to the left and see and think of what they're what they're doing better in that sense, and where we have to maybe catch up. So this was especially until, I would say, at the beginning of the year, always the thought that we had. And then some things happened. For example, in January, during the World Economic Forum in Davos, suddenly, of course, there was the election of the new American president or the establishment, and there was then the discussion about Stargate, and quite short after DeepSeek. And then we realized in the EU some kind of, oh, what's going around us? What's happening here and what's going around? So I really love this momentum at the moment, and I therefore think it's so important to talk about this topic with you today. Then in February, the AI Action Summit took up. And with that, suddenly there was this very, very strong feeling on, okay, now we come from talking really to action, and we need to take action. We also need to invest in AI, and we need to get strong in that to keep up with the pace. And I love that, because I think it's very important that we draw attention to our strengths that we have in Europe. So looking at this, I would say, looking at the facts, we have a significant market of 450 million consumers. This is quite a lot. And of course, we have world-class universities and research institutions being here today at one. We have a highly skilled workforce. We have a rich history of technological innovation, of course. We have a growing startup ecosystem, and I know that we will talk about that because you're here also from the TUM Venture Labs, and this is really important, and Munich being one of the startups hub in these topics with the world class. And of course, we also do have the whole social model that balances innovation with human dignity. So this is really a huge, huge strength that we have. However, nevertheless, we are lacking our potential. And I think this is why it's really important that we have these discussions also today, also with you, because it's always on us to take over responsibility and to really shape the future also together in this sense. So what we can see is nevertheless that we are also lacking in some sense. So if we try now to really do this comparison, then we see, of course, that the big players have a lot of market shares, especially when we look at AI. So we might have an economic vulnerability here. So of course, we see also at the momentum the geopolitical vulnerability and the democratic vulnerability also. This is important, and therefore we really need to take action at this part, and not only from what we always, when we think of Europe, only doing regulation stuff. And I think we are coming to the point where it's also very important, and what also may be the benefit, especially also with the AI Act of that, but also in terms of innovation to just step forward and go in this sense. So what I think is really important is that we now try to go the European way, and I'm very happy that on the 9th of May, the AI Continent Action Plan was published, which is a guidance and a strategy from the European Commission on how to proceed with AI and how to invest in AI. And we can also have a closer look on that. But also that this week, a group of experts as an initiative around Kai Senna published a paper about the European way. We were also one of the experts there, and about the blueprint for reclaiming our digital future. So with that, I think it's a very interesting discussion today, and I'd love to open the space to the statements of the other panelists.
You go, Goll?
Go ahead, please.
Okay, so first I have to mention that it's a great honor for a Swiss guy to talk about the EU, since I'm not I'm the only guy who's not.
But ex-French.
Yeah, I'm totally Swiss. The point that I'd like to articulate is from the point of view of startup, and there may be 450 billion people in Europe, which is about a third more than in the US. But the ratio of venture capital funding in between the US and the EU in terms of AI is that it's one to 10 from the EU to the US. And the reason that this is the following. It has nothing to do with the fact that the EU has been trying to be vocal about regulation. It is the issues that the startup ecosystem in Europe are facing fragmented markets. Think about this. You have a startup which started in Silicon Valley, then they want to do business in Chicago or in Boston or vice versa. The marginal cost for them to do this is zero or nothing. If suddenly you have a startup who want to start in Germany, start in Munich, and then needs to move to France, Netherlands, Switzerland, you name it, there are huge costs which are associated with this. They have to work out both in terms of regulation. They have to put in place a legal structure, and this is something which is very heavy. The economist actually said that this was like having a EU-wide tariff of 10%, and that was before the word tariff became something which everyone knew about it. So we are facing systematically the point and a problem, which is that we know how to get guys like all these guys here to get started, and there are very good systems in every country in Europe, so that you guys get started. But once the startup reach a certain size or a certain valuation, this is where they leave Europe, because Europe has not, the EU and even the individual players have not been trying to help young startup go from one country, from Germany, from another one, from Europe to the other, as easily as what exists right now in US. If you are in Boston and you want to go to California and vice versa, that is the issue. So AI is the very big wave. This is the biggest technological wave that I have seen, and since I'm probably 3 times the combined age of everyone here, I was even moving from mainframe to mini to PC to and so on and so on. I've never seen something as fundamentally important and amazing and generating wealth. And I would like the EU to actually realize that if they don't want to lose again the race and become as important player as the US or other countries, they should not necessarily spend time on the EU Act. They should understand how they can facilitate playing level the competition field for startup in AI as it exists right in the US. And my sense is that they are spending $0 million on this.
Thank you, Antoine.
And by the way, when we prepared, I said, if I come, can I be a bit, controversial? And Joachim was very sportive. He said yes.
Okay. Well, I also want to be controversial.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the idea is, Stephan, after your statement, I would show a few more slides, backing up a little bit what you just said, and also showing you the basics of the EU AI Act, in order so we all know what we're talking about. The idea of this European Union Week is not to praise the EU for everything they're doing. There's certainly many good things to the AI Act. It has side effects, though, it seems. And so this is a balance to be struck. We need to do well. But first, Stephan.
I changed my opening statement because I want to directly comment first on that point before switching back. Actually, it's essentially a combination of what you two said already. Sorry for changing your flow of discussion. I fully agree that. I mean, we say we are a union, but it's still extremely hard, right? As you said, it's one part is like entering the markets in this legal setup. I mean, at Pruna, we actually have 2 offices in Munich and in Paris, and it's a nightmare. Unfortunately, I have to admit. I mean, to have 2 offices is great, but the legal setup is a nightmare. Right? Just to be clear, it's very good. I come to that in a second. But the legal setup is very, very tricky. What I personally feel, what you said is, I somehow feel we are not somehow pulling the same string, so to say, right? For example, on large language models, right? There is a big player in France, for example, right? There's Mistral, right? But then what we see, unfortunately, in my opinion, in the EU too often is, let's do this large language model for this specific region. We have in Germany then some company doing some large language models. We have the Bavarian ChatGPT, right? You know about these stories. I'm somewhat disappointed, really, I have to say, that we don't say, okay, let's put the bet on one company, right? Because I feel that only then we can succeed in this race for large language models, right? Then we can succeed only in this race, right? It's still this kind of fragmentation, as you said, right, which is happening in the EU. It's not one big country, right? It's still like a lot of individual countries. And that's like, I feel it's a very big missed opportunity, I feel, right? So, not praising, right, the EU, but it's really this is very critical.
Even though in a sense you're saying we need, in some sense, more of it, or some actions that align the things more.
Yes.
And I can attest to that when I think the very first edition here of this EU Week, 17 or so, or 18 or so, we had Navis, main of the company, they're doing this indoor navigation system. It's very cool. And I invited them, I gave a talk, and I thought they could speak about how easy the EU makes it to internationalize as a startup. They said, no, it's actually pretty hard to get into France because of the differences. It may also be a bit of a French specificity, but in general, crossing a border.
It's difficult to go from one country to
another. I understand the point. It's just that
you need to define, you need to have 2 accounting systems, you need to put in place something as well as intercompany agreement. You need to have different type of regulation. You have different type of sensitivities, and that spend a lot of time of the guys which are managing, which should be developing product and sell them to clients.
Yeah. Briefly, some backup here. So, what companies come to mind? Just a few here. Mistral, obviously, with this AI assistant, Le Chat, with a 6 billion valuation, doesn't sound bad. On an alpha in Germany, Hugging Face. Recently learned it's from France. Even though your research, so there's research happening at my group using Hugging Face data. Siemens and other firms are using that in industrial context. But then if you compare that to what's happening in the US and China, OpenAI has a 300 billion valuation. This is a bit more, 50 times more. Google, Microsoft, and blah, blah, blah. Many firms in China, DeepSeek, Frauke, as you mentioned, they kind of shocked the world with using older NVIDIA chips to produce a more efficient system and selling their services at lower price tags, like scaring also their competitors, etc. There's a lot going on here. If you look at numbers or statistics, it looks similarly, just AI startups here. This is evaluation and investment, and the blue bar, there's like 2 years old data, just the same story. I think there's no Chinese company here, but yeah, there's Mistral there. And private investment in AI, same story. Yeah, there's the United States, big, China, maybe there is then a bigger part, public investment, I don't know, and then small stuff. The AI end is just 2 things worth knowing. The sequence doesn't imply causality, right? But there may be some aspects to it. Even though I see your point that it's more the fragmentation, maybe. Anyway, what is it? You said, well, there are all sorts of issues with AI, and there are, because the system may be trained with tons of data that has been produced by Russian chatbots. And I'm not kidding. So I attended a lot of talks in France. I'm currently on a sabbatical in Paris. About open source AI, and the idea is that, well, it's important to know how it was made. It's like a sausage. You want to know what went into it because you want to eat it. And if it was trained with stuff of questionable origin, it may not be the right thing. Or quite simply, and the guy showed a picture asking, I think, Dali, draw me a house. And it drew a house, but it was a typical American house. No surprise, because it's being fed with US data, not only, but predominantly. So you get US answers, which, if it comes to drawing a house, is not too bad, but it gives an idea that it's flavored at best. You may not want that either. So there are all sorts of things to think about that. You could also, of course, use it for things that we don't want to have here. So what does it do? The idea is to ensure safe, transparent, ethical use of AI. And the idea is it's like a pyramid. Yeah, there are some things that are classified as unacceptable risks or just unwanted things. We don't want social scoring, real-time biometric surveillance. So if I'm teaching and I have this thing in the background, seeing the class, and there's this person in the back looking bored again, not good. Seriously, that one could do that. Or at the workplace, I mean, we're not doing this. Just making it up. But it's one of these things that we might not want, and we don't want in the EU. But the idea here is more to have safeguards before it happens, rather than to fix problems later. And then it goes down high risk, strict obligations, AI and critical infrastructure, requiring risk assessment, data governance, that. Then the limited risk and the minimal risk things. So minimal is the category where we don't care what you do with AI in video games. It's also questionable in its own right. But anyway, the point is, and the top one of the pyramid is not many things. Yeah. Okay, and then there is also provisions for enforcement and penalties. It's partly on the EU level, partly on member state level. Okay, and there are sandboxes for startups with the idea that it makes life easier for startups before they grow up and then have more responsibilities. Very short, there's much more in terms of background. Now just flipping back to the panel. So
maybe I can mention something about the EU.
Go ahead.
So usually, I don't know if you guys know your Shakespeare, but there's the famous, I didn't come to praise Caesar, but to bury him. So I feel this is, so I feel there is a little bit of value in the AI Act, which is the following. The way you decide to put an AI application from pilot in production is very different for the way you put a classic type of application. And it's true that these days, explaining how to be able to define the governance and how we evolve in our application is something which is not trivial. And we've got quite a lot of excellent startups who are actually working on this. Defining an AI application by the level of risk is actually not a bad idea, because it allows people and C-level people to understand how to do that. This being said, trying to be able to ask such a classification at a time when the focus should be on experimenting, going fast, is exactly the wrong way of doing things. It's something which is completely wrong. And the other thing is that if they had been trying to really understand what, from a regulation standpoint, is far more important is data property. And right now, what you have is that you've got all these companies which are scrapping the data free of charge, regardless of whether this is fair use or not fair use, and they are just focusing on the totally the wrong thing which could have a value. And this is another example. And you know, we've been talking about this. Everyone has been shouting this for a decade, for not decades, but years and years, that this is the wrong things on which to work. And they keep coming back into this whole thing, ignoring something which is important. So yes, there's a bit of value, which is that it explains, it's a very strong framework to be able to explain that AI applications do not look like good old ERP and CRM, and the rest, and that's all. And the rest, they are focusing on the wrong thing.
Okay.
No, go ahead. You started first, so you have to do it, then I should.
Just to take a different standpoint. I mean, I agree, there's some value, but I also don't see the harm, because what I personally don't like is people are complaining a lot, right? That no, there's this, I'm so regulated that I don't know how to move anymore. I would disagree with that also, I have to say, right? I mean, you can, at a startup, you can do stuff, for example, also in bigger companies, you can do stuff. For me, it's often like that people use it as an excuse to not innovate, so to say, right? There is this regulation, so I can't move forward, right? I would say this is also not what the UI Act is doing, right? It's not, in my opinion, it's not like limiting too much our innovation. Or would you disagree?
I wouldn't disagree, but what worries me is that fact that they are spending so much time on something which is the wrong thing. And the feeling that I have, and I don't give you the share is that they are not, the people who are in Brussels, not spending the time and effort on what really matters.
I have a bit of another opinion there, as I think there is, besides what you said of a value, also really bringing together 27 countries agreeing on a framework. And yes, there are topics in this framework that need to be heavily discussed. But also what is happening right now, there are also a lot of questions that are not defined yet. And therefore, the EU took also an approach, a collaborative approach with the code of practices and the people working on that, taking in a lot of stakeholders, over 1,000 stakeholders working on those topics. And I think this is actually the point, taking also action and responsibility for what is happening there. And of course, I personally also do like that the EU in the AI Continent Action Plan already said that they're also working on simplifications. But you mentioned the segmentation or the fragmentation before. And I think when we see it like that, that this framework also gives guidance for the companies and also shows that 27 countries already agreed on our values and the development in this stage. I think this is quite also something we could also appreciate. However, of course, with all what is going around there in terms of what's not maybe turned out in the way it was formally mentioned. So there, of course, there are some issues, definitively. But this is also the case that we then have to work on that. And yeah, I would say this is also an additional value. And as you said, Stephan, I think that the real important thing is that it is quite complicated for especially the small and medium-sized enterprises or also the startups, so that they may be feared by the numbers you showed before, and they don't know exactly what to do. But also there, I think what is important is to give guidance. And I really like that Bavaria is at the very top front of it. So actually, we started a project funded by the Bavarian State Ministry of Digitalization and Minister Mehring, which is called the Bavarian AI Accelerator Project. So supporting small and medium-sized enterprises and startups in getting a better understanding of the AI Act and reducing time and resources to get compliant. And yeah, there we have a lot of trainings, learnings, guidelines, and so on that really break down this very complicated act.
I mean, to add one thing, thank you, Frauke. It's probably European countries being European countries, without the EU AI Act or the EU acting, probably had done individual things. And we might have ended up with a landscape which is even more fragmented because there's national AI regulation. Now, it's better to have a common one than to have different ones. But of course, it might be better to have a lighter one. That might be, but you said the main issue, Antoine, seems to be to you the fragmentation in other things, simply how to incorporate an organization.
Oh,
is that right?
If I come back, I said that the biggest issue which every startup is facing in Europe is the fragmentation market, and the fact that nothing in Europe, from what I seems to be seeing is no one in the EU is trying to actually work on facilitating the development of startup cross-country. When it comes to regulation in AI, a topic which I would say is an even much more important than trying to assess the risk associated with AI application, which again is something which has a lot of merit, is the fact that all these guys are scrapping data. And every time you read the New York Times and they quote OpenAI and Microsoft, there's a parenthesis. May we remind you that the New York Times is suing these guys for scrapping the data. So I'm sorry, we have these guys getting 300 billion valuation, and know what they are doing is that they are, I'm sorry, abusing of data, and this is something for which there would be a real need to be able to make sure that there's a stable business model being established. And here I would definitely value the ability of having the EU and other guys agreeing on this thing. Otherwise, we talk about democracy. There's going to be no newspapers. Think about what happened when was all these issues with all the Google News links and everything like this. That's much more important to have a stable business model around AI than trying to spend time to assess the risks associated. Which, by the way, is something which good guys are going to understand in 2 minutes and don't need to have anything codified.
I really need to come back to your point of the implementation. Sorry that I go from the business model, but which is quite very interesting. But I really need to make this point because the crucial part is, of course, there is an overall framework, but the implementation of the AI Act needs to be done in every single country. And what we now really also need, and which is also now for our new government in Germany, a large topic is how to process a simple implementation of the AI Act, because this is really important. No one of us wants to see this GDPR trauma again, I would say, where you came up with different forms in each single country and so on. So we really need to take a look now on this very, very crucial step of how to implement the AI Act in each of the countries, but also within Germany overall, not to do something in every So
that's an very interesting point, but here's some general stuff. You may have heard EU EU directive, EU guideline, EU act. You may have heard all these things. Difference being a directive has to be translated into national law. Guideline is a guideline, as the name says. It's not a law, it's not meant to be implemented, it's a guideline, but it has pretty strong normative power. an act is something is not to be translated to national law. So can you explain what it in that sense means to implement the AI Act?
Yeah, actually, so every country needs also different authorities to implement the AI Act. So you have this overall regulation, but then the implementation needs to be done within every single EU country. And also there you have notified bodies and different authorities that work in this system.
So exactly, it's in the sense of how to enforce it, how to implement the stuff that is provided for in the Act, but the Act wouldn't have to be translated. There's directives, the freedom to the countries, how to implement that in national law that is not required for an Act. An Act is directly relevant, but then institutions have to act.
Smiling a bit about that. I guess that's also my 2 point out. So we are talking about the EU Act now for a long time, but I guess having a perfect EU Act won't solve the issue of being in this bar chart you showed us to be in the top, right? I guess, I mean, as you said, I guess we are not wasting time, but like spending potentially too much time, not in this panel only, but in general on this EU Act, right? I mean, talking about fragmentation, I guess would be much nicer if you think about, okay, how can we have like companies which really work across the different countries, right? They like a unified tax system, for example, right? Or that we can hire the talents all over Europe easily, right? Because this is, in my opinion, mentioned something positive, right? There's a lot of talent in the EU, right? There are a lot of brilliant people here, right? And a lot of diversity also, which is a big advantage of the EU, right? And making that easier, I would appreciate that, right? If politics is working on that and spending time on this and not just on the EU.
Yeah, right? I love this point because I really think that is so true. It's a bunch of different activities that are really needed. So innovation is the balance between regulation and innovation, and also then the more important question on how to foster this innovation part. And I think this is really, really important.
I really believe, and we can discuss it later, that the issue is really the innovation in the sense of great ideas. Because I strongly believe, I mean, as you said, there are excellent universities here, right? And the excellent students, PhD students here in this group in the Munich. There are a lot of startups popping up, right? I guess the actual innovation is not the issue. The point is what you also said, Antoine, or you mentioned the numbers, right? And also the slide. It's a lot of on the venture capital side, I guess. It's a lot of this fragmentation issue, right? I guess it's probably more like that the innovation is a bit not stopped too early, but like they are like barriers, right? There is some innovation, not some, there are a lot of innovation, in my opinion, personally. So then there is like a barrier and it's not growing fast.
I mean, doing innovation research, innovation management research, that's one of the classical problems that at least are raised when it comes to Europe. Classical example that you've heard about 10 times is MP3, a format developed in Germany by Fraunhofer, but commercialized by, well, Apple and others, but not in Germany. Siemens found it not interesting. Yeah, so, and the innovation actually is not just the act of inventing, obviously, it's also the act of commercializing. That's the difference to invention. And this is indeed often, that's a classic. It's not just with AI that this problem pops up. That is where there are certain barriers, and that may be partly financed.
So I'm going to jump on this. So one thing that I would love people in the EU to work on is to establish on 27 countries, just like you've been articulating, something equivalent to the Small Business Act. Who's heard of the Small Business Act in the US? Okay, so the Small Business Act is a mandate that federal and local state institutions have to spend 5 to 6% of their budget on companies which meet the requirements would look like small businesses. To give you a sense, my company did a pilot with the Federal Reserve, and I was actually convinced that it would take something like 5 years to be able to have at least a contract in between a small startup in Switzerland and the Federal Reserve. Actually, what happened the following day is that we were asked to meet to fill a questionnaire to understand if we are meeting the requirement of the Small Business Act. And we became a supplier in 1 month. That's because the US has said not all the budget should go to some of the big giants. Currently, you have, as I understand, someone in Baden-Württemberg who's actually said that he would like to do something like this. But this is something that if we want startup to really have this wind on their back, it's something which would be great. And the EU could actually decide to do this. They can take this, and I believe that this is far, far more important than them trying to explain something like this. So once again, they are working on the wrong things.
So actually, I really need to jump in here because I think it is not only about the EU and the politicians in that sense, because as you said, I think it's about all of us. It's the question on how we can create a mindset shift also in terms of risk taking in investments. Because when I saw a study when compared with the capital that single persons do have, we are not so bad in Germany and in Europe. So we are on place number 4. But as you said, there's only one.
Worldwide, or
Yes.
Germany, Europe.
Yes,
No.
worldwide. But however, the investment, then the reinvestment is very, very low. And this was also something that I really experienced last year by myself when I went to Texas, and there was a huge startup challenge where a lot of startups took place. And those startups that win in the challenge, they reinvest always already in the next year. So they implement this mindset of giving something back to where it belongs.
From own revenues
From
or
own
from
revenues.
investments they receive?
It's not the question on how much,
Yeah.
but it's
Okay.
this
Yeah.
topic of mindset on giving back what I receive, also in that sense that I invest somewhere else. So we are always looking to our governments. We are always looking to the German government, to the EU government, but also I think it's very important to get private investments and private capital also in that sense. I don't say that we don't need the money from the EU or from German governments, but it's more about really also taking own risks or bringing in private money as well, and not then looking and discussing how bad this may be, that some money is located in single places or where other people are putting money in.
I mean, that touches on this issue of VC that we saw on the slides here, but also I think, Antoine, you had mentioned that there's much more of that around in the US than here. So what to do with that?
The thing is nothing to do with the EU. What you have, maybe there's a law in the EU which is I think there is a law in the EU which is preventing pension funds to become LP or VCs. And as a consequence, that's my understanding. I haven't known to this, maybe no better, which is why you have no problem having early stage funding. But then when you want to grow into the next phase, which is what people know as the growth funds, the big players are actually the European offices of American VCs. And remember, if I'm well, you have an American VC, do you?
No, we are European.
Oh, you're
It's not from Germany, it's from Sweden, actually. So the main investor, it's a big.
So once again, whenever it's important to understand what could the EU do to try to plane level the competition. They could work on easing and facilitating the move from AI startup from one country to the other. And you've explained this, it's something which is a nightmare. They could also implement the Small Business Act in the EU, and that would be something, we're not talking about venture capital. Eventually, VCs give money to a startup, it's for the startup to have clients. And right now, I can tell you that the percentage of spending of both the EU as well as the EU as an institution, as well as the governments in Europe, is far, far, far below the 6% which is in the US. And the third one would be to have something which would allow the pension fund to be able to allocate a bit of their money as LP of venture capital firm, and then we can start working.
Can I add something? But I agree with Frauke. It's about also the mindset of people. Completely different point I want to make actually now. It's about. I mean, you showed this slide. Can you scroll to this again where you showed like Mistral and so on and so forth, which shows for me again here. Yeah, this slide up and on the other one. You want now even the other one.
The one with the market cap, 300.
No, it's the one with the other one, where Mistral and this one here. Mistral, France, Aleph Alpha, Germany, right? It's not Europe, right? You have it as a headline here, of course, right?
Yeah.
But I still feel, but this is really my point I want to make here, right? Because it's so complicated to be in multiple countries. These companies are always like single nation companies, right? Mistral is France, Aleph Alpha is Germany. And then still we are one EU, but I still have the feeling that then people are like, this is like, if you talk with the French people, right? Of course, they are super proud about Mistral, right? If you talk about, Aleph Alpha, probably not the best success story. If we are very honest, I can say that.
We are proud of AppliedAI.
Yes. Which is France and Germany. I feel, but it connects to the fragmentation, I feel, right? Because we still have these single nation companies then, and then it's always kind of, we don't feel this European feeling, right? This is this mindset I want to make, right? In a completely different setting, right? If we would have more really cross-country companies, right? Then I would feel we are also like, and we are on this together, right? Because Mistral, Germany wouldn't invest in Mistral now, right? This is a French company, let's be open, right? This won't happen in my opinion. I feel this is one root of the problem, right? It's not that we are now really supporting one company which can compete with the big ones, right?
Question is this, I mean, we have a couple of things coming together, maybe two at least. One is the fact that there are legal differences, so it makes it harder to expand from one country to more European countries. The other may also be a cultural thing. So what about people?
But that's, I mean, I can just say that Pruna, as I said, we are in France and in Germany. I mean, these are great people, they're nice people, of course, right? And this definitely adds something, right? That you have these different cultures, right? This is definitely
but it also makes life a bit harder, doesn't it?
No.
Does it?
I mean, you are here at TUM, right? You're also, I guess, quite international already, right? So, I mean,
I guess it's not like everybody does this. And it's really an open question. And I mean, I love this. I'm really personally enjoying to be abroad. I spent a sabbatical in the UK, in the US, in Singapore, in France now. I think it's fantastic, but it also requires adaptation. And in France, the culture works a bit differently. Also, the way business is being done is a bit different. So that might, I was just wondering, Antoine, you have maybe being
I don't have a sort of overall studies. I just have tactical experience having worked with 100+ startup at the university. 90% of them are done with amazing guys, and there's always 3 founders, and of the 3 founders, you always have 2 nationalities minimum. So it's no surprise that Bertrand works with you is French, because I think that there's a sort of, and so on. There's another one which is now in the US, which has been working with me called Happy Robot, and they are from Spain and another from Germany and so on. And I believe that it's one of the huge, it's an amazing strength to have this diversity that we can have, and we should embrace diversity, and we should take this as an inevitable way of trying to mix all what we are bringing, and this is something that's right now. I don't feel that we have something which existed 30 years ago, which is that you guys wanted to go and work at BCG, McKinsey, Siemens. The cool guys now, they want to start a startup, and there are many cool guys here.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think we might be a little bit in a bubble here at TUM, and also in the startup world, because for us being international is kind of a normal thing. We go to conferences, meet people from around the world, probably similar at startup events. It's not normal for everyone, and So that may be something to push even more. So if you haven't done so, make sure you spend time abroad a semester. We should leave time for the audience. Do you have questions?
Yeah, I have a question about something that was brought up earlier about the EU AI Act, because I'm currently doing my master thesis and I'm interviewing experts there. And a few of these experts have either voiced concerns or said this is probably something that they have to go to, which is kind of adopting this American mindset of go fast, break things, especially with these kind of regulations, because if they don't, others will, the typical problem there. And they say, since there's not really hard enforced regulations in place yet, they rather push through with really tougher use cases now. Go ahead, try to, for example, agentic AI that pushes some boundaries of the higher risk use cases. Implement them now, make sure that it works, get maybe their business value already out of it. And when some hard regulation comes, they already say we have it established, and maybe then start picking out the things that are really dangerous and try to circumvent them, but the use case will still stand. And to me, this makes it a little bit dangerous that you punish the people that now are lenient with the EU AI Act, and the ones that don't care kind of get the upper hand because all the other ones get pushed down.
That's an interesting question, and if I may, I would respond first, because we have a research paper in my group about a similar thing. That's the regulation of drones. And drones was a bit similar. When drones came up, there was huge excitement, also in venture capital and startup scene. Everybody wanted to build drones. Also here, I had actually a student asking me if I would be an exist mentor. They wanted to start a drone company. One was a former pilot, literally. And what happened in the US, well, many startups entering the market, and then I think in 15 it was announced, in 16 it was enacted, there was regulation which was far tougher than expected. And after that, a lot of acquisition happened. Initially, we thought, oh, this is now when the big guys, they have courage to buy. After more careful scrutiny, it turned out the big guys were very careful, and they were right in doing so, because the big guys were typically from the industry, Boeings, etc. So they knew it's probably going to be more careful regulation in the US. It's not that only the EU can do that. And then the young guys were often in trouble. And so it's often like a fire sale when they had to sell, partly moving to military because there's less regulation there. But there's such a thing. I know this difference. In the US, it's generally let them do. And if it's a problem, you sue them and they go to hell because they pay huge damages. I'm not quite sure what's better. Break things, go fast, break things, and then fix stuff later, or end up in jail. Or it might also, even the US, it might go the way I just described. But of course, AI is different. At least not physically, things don't fall on your head. And this is what they were very concerned about with the FAA, Federal Aviation Authorities. That is different. There is maybe no authority that's one-to-one translatable that would correspond to the FAA.
You should read a book by Harvard Business School professor of economic history called, I think, Thomas McCrow, who wrote a book about the history of the central bank. And the idea is that if there had been a central bank at the time that the US was moved from state to state, it would have slowed down the economy, whereas the fact of having local banks which could regulate the production of currency is something that helped fuel the growth. And what is this? The theme of the book is the following, which is that in Europe, we want to think about, we have very smart guys in the EU who, instead of doing startup, are thinking about the problems of tomorrow. Whereas in the US, and this is the US way, nothing to do with, go fast and break things. What in the US, they do stuff, they realize what is the problem, they regulate after. But both of them regulate exactly as what you've been saying about the drones. And in Europe, what you have is that you've got guys in Brussels, and I'm Swiss, so I can make them in Brussels. They spend a lot of time without leaving the room, their room and their offices, about what could be happening, instead of letting the guy try, see what's happening, come back. And I don't wonder which one I like.
Yeah, I can share an experience that is really different, and it's not because I like the EU in general. I'm working a lot on standards like 5G Wi-Fi and on patents in these standards. And licensing standard essential patents is a huge mess. And it has been a mess for years. Like people asking for enormous sums of money from totally ignorant IoT startups. You may have somebody knocking on your door if you ever use these standards. And they came up with a regulation, which was 2 years ago. And then there was heavy lobbying from all sides. I was a little bit involved because I was part of a project for the commission. And I'm following that in research, etc. And that came really after the problems were there, because people were saying, hey, we don't know. If I'm an IoT firm, I get a letter saying you infringe on these 50 patents, they are Wi-Fi essential. You implement Wi-Fi, give me money. And I'm an SME. I go like, I have no idea. I bought this chip. Is this not licensed? No, it's not licensed. And I would say it's a mess. And this is why the EU said we need to do something here. And that was afterwards. Nonetheless, it may well be that here they're doing this too early. They should have. And also, I must really say they have consulted with all sorts of people across all industries, both implementers and chip developers. At least in that experience that I was part of, and I commented on repeatedly also in the press, they did speak to all stakeholders. It may have been different here. It may have been too much of a rush. I don't know. I saw you are the experts. That's why you're here.
I said my point. I don't feel it's blocking innovation at the moment. I don't see it. Specifically, also as I said, right, there are some very high risk applications, but many activities are not happening with this very high risk.
Let me push a little bit against, and sorry, if I briefly may, and in Antoine's direction. But your point about the startups and just trying out things, that's fine, unless they want to sell to big corporations, because they are more risk averse. And so that might be a problem where even if they run fast, they might not be able to find customers if they are B2B. How do you see
corporations are always a problem for startups. Big corporations are always a problem for startups, right? I mean, that's just truth, right? I mean, that independent of this regulation, I have to say, right? I guess, I mean, I don't know, Antoine, but you can confirm that, right? But working with enterprises, big enterprises, with startup, I mean.
Look, I mean, the US is better at doing B2C because they know that what you do is that you don't need to have a product which has the level of capabilities that you have. And usually when we got B2C startup come in the venture lab, what I said to them is the following. If as soon as you believe that your product can go viral, you splash it all everywhere as possible, and you see basically what sticks. And this is something I've had one guy where they don't know what is the value of the product, but the product is working. I think one of the girlfriends did a funny video on TikTok, and the following day they had 25,000 downloads. They still don't know exactly why people are using it or not, and so on. But they got something like 2 million. They are now in the US just because something like this. In Europe, what you have is that with large companies in B2B, you have to meet a number of requirements. The sales cycles are long, but then it's cost of acquisition versus lifetime customer value, and the RBCs to understand this well. So here, I don't think that you got differences in the US versus the EU. I think that we can find our things. Where you have differences is that some domains are moving faster in the US than they would be in Europe, and it's very important not to be working and talking to customers which are a little laggards. You have to work with guys which are really early adopters and so on. But I can tell you that on many of the domain on which TUM is really strong, like development, sustainability, mobility. By the way, the quality of the guys which are also in the EI teams is extremely high. You can really find not only the talent but also the early adopters ready to work with you. But there are a number of domains. One of the startups which raised the biggest amount of money 3 years ago, pre-revenue, so based on the quality that they have, was a system that was doing compliance migration when you move a job from one cloud to the other. When I heard about this guy, I was really impressed. My first reaction that I should have bought the company if I was still at GSX. But what I discussed with this guy is that it would be very important for them to very quickly go to the US, where you have architectures in terms of IT, which are more advanced than what you have right now in Europe. Otherwise, they run the risk of spending time to satisfy the needs of clients, which are a little late. So, but that's how the cases are very clearly identified. So I don't think this is something which is too much of an issue. I come back to 3 issues, Small Business Act, going across country, and
the investment fund.
Sorry, Antoine. The LP being able, the pension will be able to become a sorry, but I should have written this down.
Thank you. More questions from you guys. Leo.
So maybe just adding to that, so 2 of the 3 big issues are somehow related to fragmentation. And we talked a lot about different kinds of fragmentation today. Somehow interestingly, most of them are not specific to AI, right? So we see investments moving across borders. That's also would apply to blockchain, whatever other technology, most products and startups. So I was wondering, is there anything different now about AI in the positive or negative sense? So might AI be easier to get across, or I could think it's even worse, because my first thought was AI, even if all other fragmentation wasn't there, is intrinsically fragmented. So I want to see the German house being made of the US house. So there might be some expectation that the content generated is fragmented by definition. Large language models should be especially good in my language, maybe German for me, and Mistral is great for French, not as great for German maybe. So I was wondering, is there some AI intrinsic fragmentation also there, or is there other, like a positive thinking where say, maybe it's not that bad for AI as for other technologies?
Yeah, just add something. I wanted to say this before, actually, because you showed this list of the others, right? I mean, if you just show like software or IT, it would be more or less the same, right? I mean, most of these companies are actually, of course, the upper ones see a bit of OpenAI, but the rest are like software IT companies, right? There we see exactly the same, right? It's all in the US. We have some big players, of course, a few big players in Europe, SAP and so on and so forth, right? But the issue is not just in AI, so to say, right?
I would say that as well. So it's, for me, it's also the topic of there is a high awareness, of course, at the moment, and of course the pace is the speed is very high, and you really need to catch up. So therefore, I think we are drawing much attention to AI and the questions of that. But of course, we see this. AI is just a layer on top of digitalization, and it's so interesting because we are talking all about AI today, but actually a lot of those the algorithms have been there for a lot of years. Of course, we do have other amounts of storage capacity and so on that come to this, that what we have now. But yeah, actually, you see this as well in digitalization, IT, and everything else.
So I want to come back because I think this is really important. If you have to deploy an application, you're going to use a number of tools. Tools are now properties of people who don't develop the tools, but who are operating on platforms. So you go, for instance, and you decide to work on, I don't know, the Microsoft stack or the Google stack and so on, and then it means that you are going to be not only developing on certain technology, but then you're going to be also having access to the tools that allows you to move from production to deployment, and then a number of things, and you are in an ecosystem in another one. And right now, the guys who are owning the big ecosystems, they are the big players. So this is why you have right now this sort of fragmentation. Actually, it's an oligopoly. There's 3 big players which are going to come with their capabilities would be Meta, with the open source, Google, and once again, you are either using PyTorch or blockchain because you know that you are going to be on this domain, or the Microsoft one, and this is why this is so really important to think that product no longer exists, platform exists, and this is why this is true for AI.
And this is also why, for example, agentic AI, that also really can make a difference here, because this is the combination of different systems as well.
And also what you have in here in Europe, which is really important, is that you have huge amount of data. And this is something that I spend a lot of time to speak to head of innovation of companies so that they understand that they have to be very careful about. They have to be aware that their data is the most important thing.
And are they? Because I wanted to mention that actually, but we didn't have time yet, because that would be at the moment my biggest worry for the existing companies. And unfortunately, I have to say, I mean, many companies, bigger ones I know, they are working either with Google, Gemini, or they use some ChatGPT integration, right? So unfortunately, I feel that we are now giving away with this treasure of the data, right? Working again with the big players, right?
So I can understand this because a year and a half ago I was asked to give a presentation at the assembly of the CMO of the 40 biggest company in Germany. I have a dinner with them the evening before, and these guys know CRM, micro segmentation, micro clustering, and I come back in the evening and says, oh boy, they know everything. I'm going to have a lot of problem to come back and discuss with them and explain what is AI. Then I go the following day and I ask how many people know about AI, and then I ask them a question: are you happy when you see that the crawlers of Google come to your site and make your data easier to find? Yes. Are you aware that the same type of technology is now being used to scrub the data and put this into all the models? And I had half of the people telling me, really? Are they doing this? Is this legal? And that was a year and a half ago. So this is so really important. Yeah, I mean, true story. So,
by the way, an institution that might make it illegal is the EU. So we're coming back to regulatory measures.
The fact that right now you get a 300 billion valuation because you are basically stealing the fuel on which
you said that.
These things.
That's a good point.
And this is something which right now is far more important than trying to explain to people something which everyone understands, which is that you don't deploy an application the way you deploy a classic application. And risk is a very good way of measuring this, and this is a great value of the AI Act. Let's stop here.
But I want to add something, just to be clear, right? Because yes, they are stealing a lot of data by just like crawling the internet and so on and so forth, right? But what I'm really more worried about is like, I mean, you have Siemens here, right? Like Siemens has a lot of industrial data from their plants, from their machines. And unfortunately, many of these companies are like pairing up with the big players. And of course, they use it as advertisement. Like, I don't know, German company X works together with Microsoft on this, right? German company Y works with this and that, right? They also use it like to show how cool they are. Sorry to say it so open, but this is unfortunately what I feel about it, right? It's also about the internal data, this kind of industrial data, machine data. This really makes me nervous. It's also not good to steal the data from the internet and so on and so forth, right? But I'm really worried now about this, right? Because the big German or European companies are doing this, unfortunately.
But what it means for startup, and this is important, that you have to understand that you have to very quickly be integrated into these platform ecosystems, and you cannot go directly to market, which was something that was possible 20 years ago, 10 years ago.
Thank you. Maybe final question, if I give the burning question.
Yeah, I would have.
Yeah, concerning the topic of data privacy, also in the training sets for AI, is there anything in the AI Act or also supposed to be in this AI Act that's kind of prohibiting this, that is private data being used, being scrubbed somewhere, there's maybe dirty, that's dirty in marks, but data which has a lot of privacy information, which we are very careful about, especially in Germany, which is also maybe hindering innovation for our German AI companies, maybe. Is there any solution to that?
So actually, this is something where the code of practice is working on actually at the moment. So it's all about this topic about the general purpose AI provider and how you bring in then this security issue and also make explainable where the data comes from and give you more transparency and also give the user more transparency about what is happening within there and how did the model get trained. So this is actually something that is being worked on directly right now.
Yeah. So thank you, Frauke. The transparency thing is another point here. In addition, so I'm not an expert in the UAI Act, but
my hunch would be this is more covered by the GDPR, for example. So the kind of data you describe would certainly be protected by general data protection, privacy laws, by GDPR. So maybe there's no need to explicitly put that into the EU AI Act. But for that,
there's something on data privacy. I mean, I haven't read it in detail, but someone else said for it. The issue is, I mean, I'm still a professor of machine learning. So the issue is we don't have an answer yet, honestly, from a technical side. We don't know what these models are doing. If you're very open or simplified speaking, right? I mean, there are principles like how to extract data from these models, so to say, right? Get private data. It's not yet fully solved. I mean, there are some theoretical results like differential privacy and so on and so forth, but it's not practically useful yet. So there's still a lot of research to do, to be honest here, right? I guess we don't have perfect guarantees yet.
If I may, there is one very interesting startup, and by the way, startup always find the problems it's a solution to a complex problem. The startup which has been started by the founder of ID Lab, Bill Gross. And the startup is called Proeta.ai. Have a look at them. What they have done is that they seem to have been able to reverse engineer from a generative AI query what are the sources, which therefore brings a mechanism to be able to give a sort of financial compensation model. And then you can see, if data has been described, you can see a number of things. And what they've done, which I think is really smart, is that they've actually signed 400 publishers who are happy about the result coming out of this system, to be able to say, you represent us in front of the big clients. And that's something where you can say, don't try to regulate in your office, wait for guys to come and then do something.
Interesting. We should come to that. If I could ask you to each make a very short statement about what can we do to change these numbers here, these bar charts. Maybe Stephan.
I can repeat Antoine's point, I guess.
Okay.
No, seriously, let's make it easier to work across the countries and venture capital. I would, these 2 points would be enough for me to get a much better innovation.
Thank you.
Okay, so I hope all of you want to start startup and not go into academia. And
No, I disagree.
Yeah, actually, you can read. Actually, what these guys are doing, I always mention what these guys are doing because this is really, really cool. There are many professors who are actively encouraging students to do things like what Stephan's been doing. And you don't know this, but you are very literate.
That's true. And I think the most important thing is, and it's maybe the generalization of what you said already, is just take action. Take over responsibility for yourself, but also for what you want to shape, and shape it together collaboratively, because this is also the basis for interoperability and bringing together the topics. And either you're in a startup or a professor or in the economy, but take action.
Thank you. And thank you guys for being here and for being online. If there was somebody online.
and oh yeah, I should also thank Carmen, who's a helper who's not here today, and a large team of people also here.
Himanshu, others who have set everything up. Thanks very much for the support. All of you. That's it.
Yeah. We can, that's what we can